The thunder cracked overhead as rain pelted the hard Wyoming soil, turning the dirt road into a river of mud. Yates Anderson pulled his hat lower, squinting through the downpour as lightning split the darkened sky. That's when he saw her, a lone figure struggling against the wind, one hand clutching her shawl, the other protectively cradling her swollen belly. It was 1876, and the small town of Rivercross, Wyoming, was experiencing one of the worst spring storms in memory. Yates had been riding back to his ranch after delivering cattle to the railroad when the storm hit. Most folks had enough sense to take shelter, but this woman was fighting her way through the tempest, her dress soaked through, her steps faltering in the thickening mud. Without hesitation, Yates spurred his horse forward. He didn't waste time with words. When he reached her, the howling wind would have carried them away anyway. In one fluid motion, he leaned down from his saddle and scooped the woman up, settling her before him on his sturdy buckskin. She didn't resist, perhaps too exhausted or perhaps recognizing that this was her only chance against the fury of the storm. The woman trembled against him, her soaked clothes clinging to her pregnant form. Yates guided his horse toward the small cabin he maintained closer to town, for nights when business kept him from returning to his main property. It was modest but sturdy and, most importantly, dry. By the time they reached the cabin, the woman was shivering uncontrollably. Yates dismounted quickly, then helped her down with gentle hands. He led her inside and immediately set about building a fire in the stone hearth. "Thank you," the woman finally said, her voice soft but steady despite her condition. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along." Yates nodded as the kindling caught and flames began to dance. "No need for thanks, madam. Couldn't leave you out there." He straightened up and turned to properly look at his guest for the first time. She was beautiful, even in her bedraggled state, dark hair plastered to a heart-shaped face, eyes the color of warm honey. But it was the dignity in her bearing, despite her obvious distress, that struck him most. "I'm Violet Torres," she offered, attempting to tidy her appearance, though it was a lost cause. "Yates Anderson." He moved to a trunk in the corner, pulling out a clean shirt and pair of trousers. "They'll be too big, but they're dry. You should change before you catch your death." "I'll wait outside with the horse." Violet accepted the clothes gratefully. When Yates returned after settling his horse in the lean-to alongside the cabin, she was standing by the fire in his oversized clothes, her wet things hanging on a chair to dry. The shirt draped over her pregnant belly like a tent. "How far along are you?" he asked, busying himself with preparing coffee. 7 months or so," she replied, her hands instinctively moving to her stomach. "I was trying to reach the midwife in town. I've been having pains and I got worried." Yates frowned, those pains coming regular. Fear flashed across her face. "No, they come and go, but I'm alone and I got scared," he nodded, understanding her fear. "Where's your husband?" A shadow passed over her features. "Gone, killed in a mining accident 3 months ago." "I'm sorry to hear that." Yates handed her a cup of coffee. "You live around here?" "We have. I have a small homestead about 4 miles east of town. Thomas, my husband, he came out here to work the silver mines, but we were saving to buy more land. He always wanted to farm." Her voice caught slightly on the words. 4 miles is a long way to walk in your condition, especially in this weather. "Our only horse went lame last week," she explained. "I've been managing, but when the pains started." She trailed off, her hand moving to her belly again. "Well, you're safe now," Yates said firmly. "You'll stay here tonight. Tomorrow, if the weather clears, I'll take you to the midwife." Relief washed over her face. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson." "Yates," he corrected. "Just Yates." He prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, which Violet ate hungrily. As the evening wore on and the storm continued to rage outside, they talked. Yates learned that Violet had come west from Boston 2 years ago, newly married to Thomas Torres, a man with dreams bigger than his means. They had scraped by, with Thomas working the mines while Violet took in mending and laundry. His death had left her with little more than the small, unfinished cabin and the baby growing inside her. Yates found himself telling her things he rarely shared about his own journey west after the war, the years spent driving cattle, and the ranch he was slowly building 10 miles outside of town. "It's not much yet," he admitted, "but the land's good. been adding to the herd each year. You have no family, Violet asked. Lost my parents years ago, no siblings, no wife, he shrugged. Just me and the cattle. When it was time to sleep, Yates insisted Violet take the bed while he made do with blankets near the fire. As he lay listening to the rain drumming on the roof, he found himself acutely aware of her presence in the small cabin, a feeling both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. Morning brought clear skies and a world washed clean. Violet's clothes had dried overnight, and she changed back into them despite Yates' assurance that his things were hers to keep if needed. I've imposed enough, she insisted. Yates helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her for the ride into town. The midwife, Mrs. Emerson, was a practical woman who took one look at Violet and ushered her inside, leaving Yates awkwardly holding his hat on the porch. False labor, Mrs. Emerson pronounced when she emerged 30 minutes later. Common enough, especially in first-time mothers. She needs rest, good food, and less worry if that's possible. She fixed Yates with a pointed look. She tells me you found her in the storm. Good thing you did. Yes, madam. Yates shifted uncomfortably under her scrutiny. She also tells me she's alone out at that homestead. Not a good situation for a woman in her condition. Before Yates could respond, Violet appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Emerson has been very kind, she said, but I should be getting home now. And how do you plan to do that, child? The midwife asked. Walk another 4 miles. Yates cleared his throat. I'll take you home, Mrs. Torres. The ride to Violet's homestead was quiet, both of them lost in thought. The cabin, when they reached it, was indeed small and unfinished, the roof in need of patching, the porch sagging at one corner. Thomas was working on it when Violet trailed off as Yates helped her down from the horse. Yates surveyed the property with a critical eye. Your lame horse in the barn. Yes, I've been feeding him, but I don't know much about treating lameness. Let me take a look. The old gelding had a badly abscessed hoof, but it was treatable. Yates cleaned it out, wrapped it, and instructed Violet on continuing the care. Then, without being asked, he set about patching the leaking roof. You don't have to do this, Violet protested as he climbed up with tools he'd found in the small shed. Storm's coming again tomorrow, according to my knee, he replied. Can't leave you with a leaky roof. He stayed until sunset, repairing not just the roof but the sagging porch and a broken window. When he finally mounted up to leave, Violet stood in her doorway, a question in her eyes that matched the one in his heart. I'll be back in a few days to check on the horse, he said. He returned 3 days later with supplies: flour, coffee, salt pork, and sugar. And seeds for the garden he'd noticed was struggling in the hard soil. I can't accept all this, Violet protested. Think of it as payment for the meal you're going to cook me, Yates replied. Been eating my own cooking too long. The meal she prepared was simple but delicious, better than anything he'd managed in years of bachelor cooking. They ate on her small porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. Why are you helping me, Yates? Violet asked as twilight descended. He considered the question carefully. When I came west, I was broken in ways that don't show on the outside. The war did that to a lot of us. A man named Jackson took me in, taught me ranching, never asked for anything in return, said someday I'd pass it on. Guess that's what I'm doing. I think it's more than that, she said softly. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, a recognition of two lonely souls finding unexpected connection. In the weeks that followed, Yates found reasons to visit the Torres homestead regularly. He repaired fences, dug irrigation ditches for the garden, and brought Violet into town for checkups with Mrs. Emerson. Each visit, each shared meal, each conversation deepened whatever was growing between them. On a warm June evening, as they sat on the now sturdy porch, Violet suddenly gasped, her hand flying to her belly. The baby, she whispered, eyes wide. It's time. Yates had feared this moment. I'll get you to Mrs. Emerson. No time, Violet said, her face contorting with pain. This is happening fast. Panic gripped Yates, but he forced himself to remain calm as he helped Violet inside. He delivered countless calves, but this was different. This was Violet. Tell me what to do, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Boil water, get clean cloths. Another contraction hit her, and she gripped his hand with surprising strength. And don't leave me. The next hours were a blur of pain and fear and determination. Violet was incredible, strong, and focused despite her agony. Yates followed her instructions, offering support, wiping her brow, murmuring encouragements that felt woefully inadequate. When the baby finally arrived, squalling its protest at entering the world, Yates found himself holding a tiny, red-faced boy. "A son," he said, voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the infant in clean linen and placed him in Violet's arms. Tears streamed down her face as she cradled her child. "Hello, little one, your papa would have been so proud." Watching them together, something shifted in Yates' heart, a certainty that he hadn't felt in a very long time. He stayed that night, sleeping in a chair beside the bed, waking whenever the baby cried or Violet stirred. By morning, he knew what he wanted, but fear held him back. What right did he have to ask for a place in their lives? 2 days later, Mrs. Emerson arrived, having grown concerned when Violet missed her appointment. She took charge immediately, checking mother and baby and pronouncing them both healthy. "You did well, Cowboy," she said to Yates with grudging respect, "but she'll need help for a while yet." "I'll be here," he said simply. After the midwife left, Yates found Violet sitting in the rocking chair he'd repaired, nursing her son. "Have you named him?" he asked. "Thomas, after his father," she replied, "but I'll call him Tommy." Yates nodded, his throat tight. "Violet, I need to go back to my ranch for a few days. The cattle need tending, and I've got a couple of hands who will be wondering where I am." Fear flickered across her face. "Of course. You've already done so much. I'll be back," he promised. "But I need to ask you something before I go." She looked up at him, the baby nestled against her breast, her honey-colored eyes uncertain. "I'm not good with words," Yates began, "and I know this might seem sudden, though it doesn't feel that way to me." He took a deep breath. "I care for you, Violet, for you and for Tommy. I know I can't replace what you've lost, and I wouldn't try. But I'm asking if you might consider a future where you wouldn't have to face everything alone." Surprise registered on her face, followed by something softer. "Are you proposing, Yates Anderson?" "I reckon I am," he admitted. "Not very romantically, I'm afraid." A small smile touched her lips. "I think finding a woman in a storm and delivering her baby is romantic enough." Her expression grew serious. "But are you sure? Taking on another man's wife, another man's child?" "I'm sure of what I feel," Yates said firmly, "and Tommy needs a father. I'd be honored to be that for him. As for you," his voice softened, "I think I've been looking for you without knowing it." Violet, tears welled in her eyes. "I need time, Yates. This is all so unexpected." "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be back in 3 days, and your answer then will be the right one, whatever it is." Those 3 days were the longest of Yates' life. He threw himself into ranch work, repairing fences, checking on new calves, and meeting with his 2 ranch hands about the upcoming cattle drive. But his thoughts constantly returned to Violet and Tommy, to the small homestead that somehow felt more like home than his own ranch. On the 3rd day, he rode back to the Torres place, his stomach in knots. As he approached, he saw Violet sitting on the porch, Tommy cradled in her arms. She stood when she saw him, her face unreadable. Yates dismounted slowly, his heart pounding. "I said I'd come back." "You did," she acknowledged. "And I've been thinking about what you asked." He waited, afraid to hope, afraid to breathe. "My husband was a good man," Violet said quietly. "He would have wanted Tommy to have a father, and he would have wanted me to be happy." She took a step toward him. "I think I could be happy with you, Yates. I think we could build something good together." Relief and joy flooded through him. "Is that a yes?" "It's a yes," she confirmed, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. "But I have conditions." "Name them." "This land was Thomas's dream. I want to keep it even if we live primarily at your ranch, and I want Tommy to know about his father as he grows up." "We'll keep the land," Yates agreed without hesitation. "We can plant it, maybe build it up for Tommy when he's older, and of course he'll know about Thomas. I wouldn't have it any other way." Violet's eyes shone with tears, but they were happy ones now. "Then yes, Yates Anderson, I will marry you." He crossed the distance between them in 2 strides, carefully gathering her and the baby in his arms. "Thank you," he whispered against her hair. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Rivercross. Mrs. Emerson stood as witness, along with Yates' ranch hands and a few townspeople who had come to know Violet. It was a simple ceremony, but meaningful in its sincerity. Afterward, Yates took his new family home to his ranch, a solid, if modest, two-bedroom cabin with a wide porch and a view of the mountains. The land spread out around them, dotted with cattle and bordered by a clear running creek. "It's beautiful," Violet said, taking in her new home. "It's yours now," Yates replied. "Ours." Life settled into a rhythm as summer progressed into fall. Violet transformed the cabin with small touches, curtains at the windows, wildflowers on the table, the aroma of home-cooked meals. Tommy grew strong and healthy, his curious eyes taking in the world around him. Yates found himself changed by their presence. The empty spaces inside him, carved out by war and loneliness, began to fill with the simple joys of family life. Tommy's first smile, Violet's hand in his, evenings spent planning for the future. They visited the Torres homestead regularly. Yates and Violet worked side by side, planting the fields, repairing the cabin. It became a second home, a place to honor the past while building their future. As winter approached, bringing with it the promise of long evenings by the fire, Yates reflected on how drastically his life had changed in just half a year. One storm, one moment of decision, had altered his course forever. One evening, as snow fell softly outside their window, Violet found him standing on the porch, lost in thought. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the chill. "The night we met," he admitted. "How close I came to taking a different trail home." She slipped her hand into his. "But you didn't." "No, I didn't." He pulled her close against the cold. "Do you ever regret it, saying yes to me?" Violet looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the love that had grown between them. "Not for a single moment." "You gave me a future when I thought mine was lost. You did the same for me," he said softly. "I just didn't know I needed saving until I found you in that storm." The next spring brought new beginnings. The cattle herd increased with a successful calving season. The fields at the Torres homestead were planted with wheat and corn. And Violet shared the news that their family would be growing. She was expecting a baby in the late fall. Yates' joy was boundless. He threw himself into preparations, expanding the cabin to add another bedroom, crafting a cradle from pine, and ensuring that both properties were secure and prosperous. Tommy took his first steps that summer, toddling across the cabin floor into Yates' waiting arms. The moment brought tears to Yates' eyes, this child who was his in every way that mattered. "Papa," Tommy exclaimed, one of his first words, and Yates' heart nearly burst with love. Violet, watching them together, placed a hand on her growing belly. "He adores you," she said, "as do I." "I'm the fortunate one," Yates insisted. "Every day I thank God for the storm that brought you to me." Their daughter, Rose, was born on a crisp November morning with significantly less drama than her brother's arrival. Mrs. Emerson attended the birth, but this time there was no rush, no fear, just the joy of welcoming a new life into their family. "She has your eyes," Violet said as Yates held his daughter for the first time. "And your strength," he replied, marveling at the tiny fingers wrapped around his rough hand. As Rose grew alongside her brother, the Anderson ranch prospered. Yates' cattle operation expanded, allowing him to hire more hands and take on less of the physical labor himself. The Torres homestead flourished too, its fields productive, its fruit trees beginning to bear. Their family became known in the community for their generosity, helping neighbors during difficult times, just as Yates had once helped Violet. They took in a young widow and her son when influenza claimed her husband, giving them a place on the ranch until they could get back on their feet. They contributed to the building of a schoolhouse in River Cross, insisting on the importance of education for all children in the area. 5 years after that fateful storm, Yates and Violet stood on their porch watching Tommy, now a sturdy 5-year-old, teaching 3-year-old Rose how to feed the chickens. Their newest addition, 1-year-old James, was napping inside. "Did you ever imagine this?" Violet asked, leaning against her husband's solid frame. "That night in the storm, did you ever think we would have all this?" Yates wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her close. "I couldn't have imagined it," he admitted. "But I think some part of me recognized you right away, not just as someone who needed help, but as someone who would change my life completely. A pregnant woman stumbling through the rain didn't exactly scream future wife material, Violet teased. Shows what you know, Yates replied with a smile. To me, you looked like courage and determination. Those were things I understood. They watched their children a moment longer before Violet spoke again. I was so afraid when Thomas died, I thought my life was over before it really began. She looked up at Yates, her eyes full of the love that had grown between them. But it was just beginning in ways I couldn't foresee. For both of us, Yates agreed. That night, as their children slept soundly and the Wyoming wind whispered around their home, Yates and Violet lay in each other's arms, grateful for the storm that had brought them together and the love that had seen them through every season since. I love you, Yates Anderson, Violet whispered in the darkness. Every day a little more than the day before. And I'll love you until my last breath, Violet Anderson, he promised. You and our children are the greatest blessing I've ever known. Outside their window, a soft rain began to fall, not a storm this time, but a gentle, life-giving shower that would make the land green and the crops grow tall. Just like their love, it had started dramatically, but had developed into something sustaining and constant, a force that nurtured everything it touched. In the years that followed, the Anderson family would face challenges, drought seasons, economic hardships, the inevitable difficulties of raising children in the still Wild West. But they would face them together, drawing strength from the bond that had formed between a lone cowboy and a pregnant woman on a stormy Wyoming evening in 1876, a moment when destiny had hinged on a simple act of kindness, performed without a word.